All right, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. A couple of housekeeping notes here. We're live. And so what that means is you get to ask questions. And we encourage you all to fire away on the questions in the question and answer option on your platform there. And I'll do my best to try to field those and kind of weave them in. We'll try to leave a little bit of room at the end here as well. But I want to make sure you all knew that. I'm going to ask each member, as I ask them the first question, to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Bob Costello. Bob, please introduce yourself. And since you're the first on the panel, I'm going to ask you to give everyone just a 5G 101 primer, if you will, and then get into what I'm going to ask all the panel members, an overall state of the state as you all see 5G and the Internet of Everything. Bob, you're on.
Thanks, Luke. Pleasure to be here today. I've done a number of these for the last couple of years, so it's great to return for another year. So I'm Bob Costello. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, where our role is not just cybersecurity, but also advising industry and working with industry to secure our critical infrastructure. So 5G is the next evolution of the cellular networks worldwide. About every 10 years, we go through another evolution of networks. We went from 2G to 3G to 4G and now to 5G. So there's a lot of differences between 4G and 5G. It's going to have a lot lower latency, a lot higher bandwidth. But with that comes a lot more requirements for cellular towers and more locations. It doesn't transmit quite as far. We expect a lot more capabilities for usage at the edge with 5G. There are a number of different security issues that could be present in 5G networks, particularly with supply chain and other elements where we have significant concerns in the US government over some of the vendors that are available worldwide to support 5G networks. So while it will be a great advancement, it won't wholly replace 4G anytime soon. In fact, just in the year 2022 upcoming is when the majority of the 3G networks will be turned down. So 4G and 5G will continue to live together and continue to have wide applications in both areas for usage.
Yeah, and no doubt that anytime you're introducing a new type of technology, it introduces a new element of risk, I would imagine, as well. And obviously, Cisa being in the role of trying to manage risk and harden those environments. I know there's a lot of good activity going on that Cisa is really getting in front of that, and not only from an internal, protect your own environment, but obviously critical infrastructure, the civilian entity, et cetera. Does that sound fair?
It does, absolutely. And you've probably seen in recent months, we're increasing our partnership with the public and private sector initiative, the JCDC, which is a working group that we have between ourselves here at Cisa and industry as well as academia. Just last week, we stood up our advisory council with members of industry and the academic sector as well that will be advising our director on initiatives that Cisa should undertake, direction of the agency, and providing us input. So we absolutely are integrated up and down the line, not just on the technical levels, doing work with our partners over at the FCC and others, but also engaging more and more with different sectors of the US, academic, critical infrastructure, and then a lot of our partners that we've had for many years in the cybersecurity industry.
JCDC, you mentioned, what does that mean? What does that stand for, just for the audience sake?
Sure. So the JCDC is basically, it's the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. So that's a working group that's standing up now between ourselves, Cyber Command, the National Security Agency, the FBI, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, as well as with input from our state, local, tribal, and territorial governments across the US. So essentially, it's an environment where we can share information, work together on common problems, ensure that the message of Cisa is reaching the widest audience, and that we're also hearing from the widest audience on issues that they're experiencing and seeing. So it's standing up now and developing almost every day with new capabilities and messaging that they're putting out. It's a way for us to ensure that our message is heard and that we're also hearing from our partners in the most active way possible.
Excellent and good timing. All right, well, I'm going to roll on to Chris Wurst, and I won't introduce Chris. I'll let him introduce himself, other than to say, Chris, two things. One, it's great to see you. Two, listening to the chief on down earlier in the show, wow, you've got your hands full there. There's no question about that. 300 different types of ports out there, all kinds of different moving activities. And boy, it warmed my heart to hear the chief talk about things like electronic A file, right? Just awesome. So with that, Chris, please first introduce yourself and then just give us a top line state of how you all see 5G and where you think you would be using it.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. Appreciate being here today, and thank you for that introduction. Great to see you too. It's been a long time. So my name is Christopher Wurst. I am the Enterprise Networks and Technology Support Directorate Executive Director here at CBP. And as you heard from previous speakers, we do have quite a challenge in getting information and data into the hands of our operators at the edge. So 5G we see is going to be a huge benefit for us. As XD or as CIO Costello, used to be an XD. I used to work with him closely. As CIO Costello indicated, latency has been a big issue for us. We've tried in many cases to use like satellites for backups and so forth. This is going to be a real game changer for us due to the latency. A lot of our applications are very sensitive to timeframes and so forth. So that's going to be a huge benefit. Another huge benefit that we see with 5G is going to be the ability to do higher resolution information, particularly on the video side. We're moving more and more into video surveillance. As you heard from the chief just previous to this conversation, right? They're looking at that situational awareness. How can they use that as a force multiplier for their RVSS systems, the remote video surveillance, for the NVSS systems, for the mobile video surveillance systems, and getting good quality video to be able to actually see what's going on in some of those situations is going to be vital. So we see huge benefits, again, thanks to the latency issues being resolved, and as well as the higher bandwidth that we'll be able to push through that. We see a lot of other opportunities. You guys might be familiar. We do a lot with the common operating picture type scenarios when we do events or operations. We've been deploying the DoD Tactical Awareness Kit throughout our enterprise. Again, that's going to provide a lot of situational awareness. It's going to bring that information to the edge, to a mobile device like a phone or a tablet, which we think is going to be invaluable to protecting the security and the vitality of our agents and officers out in the field. So we see a lot of benefits come down the pike, and we're excited about this new technology.
A lot of moving parts there, no question about it. Let me roll over to Pat. Pat Casey, you are the CTO. Well, I'll let you introduce yourself. But part of ServiceNow, how does ServiceNow fit into a 5G ecosystem? Please introduce yourself first, and then give us a state of the state as to where ServiceNow sees themselves in this ecosystem.
Sure. So again, my name is Pat Casey. I am the CTO at ServiceNow. You probably know us as a provider of workflow systems. We're used heavily in the civilian world. We're used heavily in the government world. Like in the border world, ICE, for example, uses us rather extensively. If you happen to get apprehended at the border and released with paperwork, that paperwork is tracked through an ICE system based on top of ServiceNow. That's give some context there. On the 5G side of the house, we view it as both a positive and a negative, and I'll say that in a bit of a controversial, potentially controversial way. I think Robert articulated there's a lot of benefits on it. It's much faster. You've got better bandwidth. You can hook up video to it. You can hook lots of stuff up to it that you couldn't do on a 4G network. The capabilities expand To make that work though, 5G is shorter range than 4G. It is. So in a port of entry where you've got landlines, it works awesome. If you're out there in the Big Bend somewhere far away from like any heavy industry, it's not going to be effective unless someone runs a network out there, which the government might eventually decide to do. But right now we don't have it. So we perceive it as largely to be a hybrid network with 4G and 5G working in parallel really into the future. And that means systems that get designed here have to work well in both modes. And it also means that there's a bit of a security challenge here for us all. And it's not only a supplier challenge. There could be bad actors who want to poison the supply chain and put bad things into our network. I apologize for the dog. She's upset about something in the background. It's also a system design challenge because as we plug more and more things into this network in more and more distributed points around the world, those are more and more points where a bad actor can try to physically tamper with material or logically tamper with unpatched material. So securing the networks that we build out here is just as important as building in the first place. And that is where ServiceNow really does think that we have a bunch of technologies that will help people do that, whether we're on the government side of the house or the civilian side.
No question that the while this technology expands a plethora of use cases, many of which we've already heard, and no doubt we're going to hear a couple more, the attack surface gets a lot more expanded as well and complicated. Kurt, let me roll over to you. You're actually, if I understand correctly, on the ground over there at CBP, at Ground Zero, and doing a lot of various activity over there. Please, one, describe your role there, and then how do you all fit into this ecosystem?
Hey, Luke. Yeah, my name is Kurt Farber. I'm the director at SAIC and the program manager for our work at CBP, specifically supporting the Targeting and Analysis Systems Program Directorate. But at SAIC, we're working on the next generation of mobile services and capabilities for CBP's frontline, who have the very important mission of securing our borders and keeping us safe. We see 5G as an enabling technology, as a data transport option for a lot of the edge services of software and apps for our mobile cloud-driven networking, compute, and storage, supporting those front lines. And really, it kind of boils down to a couple things. It enables us to do things that enables CBP to push execution out to the tactical edge, which is a common theme that I think we've heard throughout the day today, and seamlessly connect officers, agents, sensors, devices, and information, but then also extending capabilities and services out and across the enterprise, services such as facial matching capabilities, image classification, or anomaly detection. And then also with 5G and Internet of Things, being able to enhance operations, specifically on our side of the house for targeting, vetting, and analysis, with higher quality, richer, and more available data. And just really, as I mentioned earlier, extending those targeting, vetting, and analysis capabilities out to the tactical edge.
So I hear the sort of mash of the 5G and the Internet of Things, and let me throw this one at you, Chris. First of all, are you all using 5G at all at this point? Do you have any prototypes in place? Do you have any even if it's testing in the lab or anything operational where you're using 5G? And then tacked onto the back of that question would be, as you're using it in respect to Internet of Things, do you see more things being enabled as far as or added, or simply taking the things, if you will, that are out there and plugging them in via 5G? Just so I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so to answer the first question, CBP is actively doing some pilots with 5G, primarily around our cellular backup solutions. We've been using 4G as a backup. So one of our challenges, particularly in CBP, is that last mile, right? And a lot of times that gets disrupted and then it will take down a port. And normally that last mile, even if we could get multiple carriers in there, they still use that last mile. So regardless if we try to go with multiple carriers, we still lose connectivity. So one of the things we've introduced is it used to be 4G backup, which didn't give us as high a bandwidth to
Sure.
still operate the port after we lost the network. So 5G we see as a huge benefit to give us the additional bandwidth we need to continue operating a port, in particular ports of entry when they go down. So that could be a huge game changer. We've started to install that in a few places, working closely with some of the carriers, right? So part of the challenge right now that we have is, 5G is not ubiquitous as much as 4G was.
Sure.
So, there's still pockets and gaps where while we're testing it and doing some evaluation on it, and so far it's been positive, we are limited in where we can introduce that and implement that. With regards to your second question, we see it as an enabler of new technology. So I mentioned earlier the common operating picture, and you heard from Mr. Farber, getting information out to the edge. So we see that this is going to be an enabler of new technology, being able to do facial recognition maybe out at the edge. Right now we have to bring it in, and we're unable to kind of really do that out, in the field, which would be probably highly beneficial for an agent or an officer to know exactly who's in front of them. We see this as an enabler for license plate reader technology, where we may be able to expand how we collect license plate information and put that back into the systems and give, again, some situational awareness up front to those edge operators. So there's some benefits there, and we're excited about, those opportunities. Again, I see, the way we do video surveillance, the way we synthesize information from sensors to video, right? Internet of Things, the promise there is that all that data can be brought back into a central place and kind of synthesized. And I think we heard the chief say, how does that get as far as like robotic automation and stuff like that, and those kind of automated technologies, and how does that synthesize all that information to bring a better awareness to the edge operators. So those are some of the things that we could see coming down the pike. We see obviously a lot of our technology partners developing those kinds of technologies that would help us grab all that information, synthesize it, pull it into a common area, and be able to make some sense out of that and portray a decent picture to the operators and the agents, whether that's in a common command center or even pushing that out to the mobile device on the edge where they can actually physically see that stuff. So we could have like a drone flying, collecting video. I could have an agent right below the drone actually seeing what that drone's seeing, because the latency's reduced, and the bandwidth is there to be able to push that kind of information across the network.
Well, we'll talk about futures a little bit more towards the end, but real quick, it sounded like two things. One, more things in regards to Internet of Things, in regards to the sort of the backup piece, and no doubt, I think it was Pat who pointed out, got to put a lot of steel in the ground if you're going to pull that off comprehensively. I'm just curious as to, once that capability gets in place, what have you seen as far as is the ability of that bandwidth pretty comparable to the landlines at that point? I'm just trying to match it up for the listening audience to get a sense as to how comparable it is.
In some cases, it gets extremely close.
Okay.
Particularly at some of our remote areas where they don't even have a good facility to get out to our remote locations, right? So we're limited by the terrestrial line anyway. In some cases, I can only get, for instance, a T1 to a site, right? If I can now get coverage for 5G, I could probably get even more bandwidth at some of those sites. Now, in the major metro areas and major, cities and things of that nature, it's probably obviously a little bit less in those cases, only because there's better facilities, right? There's more incentive for the telecom providers to provide good terrestrial lines into those areas. But at our remote ones, it definitely could provide a bigger benefit if we could get the coverage out there. One other little piece I do want to mention too is one of the concerns we have is priority and preemption. So one of the challenges, and working closely with FCC and our FirstNet partner, so to speak.
First of all, if I may, what does that mean to the layman? What does priority mean?
So priority and preemption is vital to law enforcement. So the reason we use LMR radios versus, say, a cell phone is because we can guarantee that when you push the talk and you need to get a communication across, it gets delivered, right? You have priority on the network and you preempt anybody else. So let's give a case in point. If we recall when New York City had that major outage and everybody was on their phones, or even 9/11 and everybody was on their phones, if we don't have priority and preemption as a law enforcement agency, then we can't get through on those calls, right? So if I'm using 5G, I'm competing with all those other citizens and so forth on the network. Having priority and preemption to make sure that our information is getting through to the law enforcement entities that need it is critical and vital, not only for officer safety, but for public safety as well. So that's what priority and preemption is, ensuring that, you know, in critical situations and environments that we are able to ensure that our data will get through and will be prioritized on that 5G network is critical to ensuring that, you know, we can continue to function and support our mission.
Sure. Did get a question in from KS. Does CBP see 5G helping to enable additional UAS usage? And of course, you've already answered that. The answer is absolutely yes. Pat, give us an example of the use of 5G at this point. I'm sure you've had some customers that are using 5G and you're stitching it into your environment there. Can you give us a use case?
I'll give you two.
Sure.
One is very prosaic, but almost all the major telcos are ServiceNow customers, and they are rolling out 5G nationally and domestically. So they are using our products to actually manage the rollout of their 5G networks, which is a very tactical operational problem. But if you're talking about a 5G rollout, it is physically more devices you have to roll out as a network provider than a 4G. Sometimes an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude more antennas to get analogous coverage.
Wow.
So that's it's about a 10th the coverage zone. So you need a lot more antennas out there. And then the most common use case, I think everyone mentioned this, is frankly video. People are wiring up parts of the environment with video cameras that they can't do on older networks, and they're getting higher res video out of there. The place where I've seen it used in some cases is frankly hospitals. I've seen a couple of use cases where people wanted to put video in the patient's rooms to give another point of view so they don't have to send a nurse in as frequently. And they're a good environment as well because it's closed. You can get good network coverage, but you don't want to run cabling through there.
Sure.
Because you know, dust, disruption, and everything. So they can set up a 5G network really quite quickly. I think that's rather analogous to the border agents' desire to put some cameras up at the major points of entries and do the analogous video capture and facial recognition on top of it.
Excellent use cases. Bob, how about over at Cisa? Not sure, are you all using 5G at this point? If so, we'd love to hear about that, or where you're planning on using it.
Sure. Well, we are, you know, for our end users, most of our new phones now are 5G, so I guess we could count that as a use case.
Hey, we'll take it, right?
Yeah, we'll take it. You know, we are absolutely looking at how we can improve the operations of our field units. You know, the mission of CISA is quite broad, much like CBP and the other parts of DHS. People think we just do cybersecurity. We don't. We do a lot of infrastructure security. We're deeply involved in chemical security. As we all know, chemicals can be combined together to make really bad things, and that there's a lot of regulations on how to handle them. So our chemical inspectors right now don't have a lot of great IT when they go out in the field to do their inspections. And so I truly believe that 5G will be part of that, as will other technologies. As they're going out there and doing inspections, recording events, you know, it'll be absolutely critical. We do have the emergency communications division, which is part of CISA. That's the child or the product of the old national communication systems. So CISA is deeply involved with FirstNet, priority, preemption, emergency communications, and how that entire apparatus works for government. That is all CISA. Led by the executive assistant director, Billy Bob, who is, you know, 100% involved in the 5G rollout, how the telecoms work together, how we work with the telecoms as the government, because we do have that absolute need in case of an emergency. Everyone needs to be able to talk to each other. We need to, bump above others on those networks. We need to have an understanding of the resiliency of the networks that they're building. And then we're also communicating really deeply with all of the telecoms on, concerns that I think have been well published on some of the vulnerabilities in the supply chain, the software side and the hardware side of the components that go into a 5G network. And that's everything from just the antennas that you see being deployed out on the street, to the software that runs in the cores of these networks that will now manage the new 5G networks for the largest telecoms. So we're very deeply involved in it. We are using it. We'll have similar use cases as CBP for some of the backup connections to our sites, although on a much smaller scale here.
Right. That's an interesting catch. So the organization that works with the telecommunications industry to instill the priority and preemption technology into the offering is actually in Cisa, right? So what Chris is asking for and needs from a law enforcement operational standpoint, your entity inside of one of your entities inside of Cisa is actually responsible for ensuring that gets baked into that technology.
They are, absolutely. And also I'm working with the telecoms to make sure they're adhering to the requirements and standards. And in fact, we even have space for all the telecoms in our headquarters over here where they can come in and work with us as we return to the office. But yes, we have a very deep relationship with all of the telecoms.
Interesting catch there. Kurt, how about over at SAIC? Any use cases that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so for us, 5G really becomes an enabler of the services that we're providing on the mobile devices. So in the example of CBP, the ability to extend our targeting and vetting capabilities to officers and agents out on the edge, roving operations along the border is very important. But then also the other use case, and there are a couple of things that I have in my mind right now for use cases of where we do that effectively. One is the officers and attachés that are in foreign countries under the Immigration Advisory Program, that all they have is a mobile device. They don't have all of the CBP resources, at their fingertips, and they're using that mobile device along with all of the other services that CBP provides. It becomes their lifeline back into the network of data information that CBP has. Mm-hmm. Another example is, with the Operation Allies Refuge and Operation Allies Welcome, with the evacuation of people out of Afghanistan, and supporting the ability of not just DHS, but DoD, State Department, and the intelligence community to use edge type of devices to screen and vet the people that are coming into these locations, to make sure they're safe to put on an airplane to come into the United States. The other use case example is enhancing security. And what I mean by that is extending capabilities, whether it's biometric or biographic searches of a person that is standing in front of an agent or an officer or people that are in front of them, and having the ability to validate their identity and be alerted to any risks or warnings, and then take appropriate actions. Those are kind of the two primary areas that I see 5G kind of lending itself to enabling and accelerating CBP's mobile extension and capabilities.
Fantastic use cases, and I understand rumblings about a sort of a touchless experience in the airports. We're all looking forward to that, that's for sure. Pat, let me go over to you and just talk about priorities. What do you see out there as far as the demand signal for this capability, and sort of how is ServiceNow lining themselves up to that?
In terms of how the consumer world or industry is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm seeing two different vectors. On the consumer world, everybody's super excited about 5G. And so the telcos are excited about it as well, because you can sit at home or you can be on your phone and you can watch YouTube TV and high bandwidth, and it's awesome. And my kids are excited about it. My wife's excited about it. There's 300 million Americans who are excited about it. And that is driving a lot of the behavior on the part of the telcos, because that's who their customer base is. In industry, I would say it is more mixed. People are not looking to replace large scale landlines where they exist. But you're starting to see people say, hey, look, do I really need to run a landline out to this oil derrick, or can I just run a 5G and still get my data back on it? So it's starting to be an alternative to landlines for high bandwidth use cases. And these video use cases people talk about, these machine learning use cases people talk about, or the ideas of getting kind of long-term site installations that just surveil an area and collect the data. Well, right now they collect it, can't send it anywhere. With 5G, we can ship it up to a central site and you can actually look at it and make intelligent decisions off of it. So that's where I'm seeing the main drive. It's an alternative to extremely expensive landlines, or disruptive, excuse me, sorry.
Sure, I'm thinking not only that, but in real time, right? In that kind of situation, because of the capability of that bandwidth on a 5G. And I see Chris Wurst's wheels turning about how many last mile links can he get rid of once he enables this capability. Chris, let me go over to you and just talk about what are the priorities. I mean, if somebody could just hand you a menu of 5G capabilities, right, to enable these Internet of Things that we're talking about, what would be the top priority for CBP at this point? And before you answer that, I'm encouraging you all, send in those questions and we'll throw them in here hot. Chris.
So the number one, and I think Mr. Casey keeps alluding to it, is the coverage. You know, it's going to be very easy for us to get coverage in the, you know, what we like to call the NFL cities, right? The carriers are all about getting installed there because, again, their money maker is the consumer industry and not necessarily, you know, the rural areas that CBP operates in. So coverage for us is going to be number one. You know, working closely with CIO Costello and Cisa and FirstNet and so forth, and trying to make sure we have appropriate coverage where we need it and where we need to operate is going to be number one. Aside from that, you know, we do see some initial use cases, like I already mentioned, the cellular backup. I failed to mention, you know, we do a lot of disaster recovery operations, whether it's wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes, whatever. You know, in a lot of those cases, right, a lot of that infrastructure gets beat up and doesn't work anymore, particularly a central office goes down. I lose my terrestrial lines, right? A lot of these carriers can come in with their cellular on wheels, different kind of applications like that, which will give us the bandwidth we need to kind of go into those emergency situations and still provide, you know, adequate security and operations and support the public needs in those cases. So we see some scenarios like that we will initially want to take advantage of. Mm-hmm. We see some initial opportunities, as you mentioned, with the drones already, right? Being able to grab that video and start to push that around, like you said, in real time is going to be critical. Right now, a lot of our operations they take the video and it's uploaded once they get back into the office. You know, trying to avoid that and getting that real-time information will be, I think, a huge game changer for our end users.
No doubt. You mentioned NFL City. Just for the listening audience, what is an NFL City?
So we just call that the major metropolitan areas like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, right? They're going to roll out 5G to those quickly because that's where their consumer base is going to be. That's where their moneymaker is. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we operate in, you know, in Idaho on the border. We operate in Montana in the middle of nowhere, right? You heard the Big Bend stories and, right? So there's not as many dense populations there. There's no incentive for some of these carriers to put infrastructure there, particularly more infrastructure, as Mr. Casey alluded to, in order to get the same amount of coverage on the 5G network. So it is an investment that the telecom providers are going to have to make. Getting them to make those investments, we have the challenge already today with 4G and getting coverage there, and that has much wider areas. that it can cover. And so now when you get an even smaller area and it requires a little bit more infrastructure, getting them to provide that infrastructure is going to be that much more difficult. So those are the challenges that we're going to run into, is the coverage, particularly in the areas that we operate, not only at port of entries, but between the port of entries, which is vital to our mission.
No doubt. And yeah, last I checked, haven't seen an NFL stadium on the border, northern or southern. But I got a question in here for you. Is CBP working with industry to evolve seaports, right? We haven't really talked about seaports much, to become smart, leveraging 5G, IoT, cloud, AI capabilities. Let's talk about seaports for a minute.
So I think that's on the radar. We've had a lot of challenges at the seaports. We've tried to install like some kind of terrestrial line in some of the seaports, trying to get out to where the cargo and the ships are coming in and actually be able to process that, not only on the cargo side, but also on the cruise lines and so forth. And trying to get enough technology out there and enough bandwidth, and even keeping it stable. We have many seaports that are unstable just because of the nature of, you're going out on docks and so forth, trying to hardwire stuff. It's just prone to failure. We see huge opportunities once 5G becomes ubiquitous in those kind of areas, which again, we would consider a lot of those to be NFL type city areas.
Yeah.
We think that that's going to be a huge game changer. As Mr. Farber said, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for them to now push those applications to the edge because the latency will be reduced and we'll have higher bandwidth. So a lot of opportunity there going forward. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it's definitely on the roadmap. That's one of our challenging areas that we think 5G can help us solve.
Fantastic. Pat, let me throw it over to Kurt, let me throw it over to you. Priorities for 5G.
So I would say it's gonna focus on, as I've visited some of the ports of entry and border patrol stations and talked to agents, officers, and leaders out there, they're very interested in, or their priority is focused on enabling their frontline users, so they're not having to spend a lot of time behind a computer terminal or entering data, and very focused on roving type of operations and doing what law enforcement officers do best with eyes on target, and being able to augment that with more mobile type of technologies and services. And again, I think IoT and 5G just become one of the enablers of those capabilities and services to the front line.
Definitely an area of focus. Let me roll it over to Bob. What are the priorities for Cisa at this point in regards to 5G?
Sure. Well, I mean, our primary focus is, of course, securing the supply chain and the rollouts. That is of paramount importance to us. And then also safeguarding, our ability to respond as, a whole of government approach to a disaster or an event. That's absolutely critical. I think, one of the things we're also seeing in the government too is, and we've talked about it a little bit here, we can't forget about rural America. It is a very, very large portion of where the population of America lives. And there is a huge need for expanding, the internet to reach all of Americans. We still have a huge swath of America that does not have daily access to the internet, or children that don't have an ability to, get online and learn to the same level as everyone else. And that's something that we're, very concerned with. So certainly the overall security is very critical. I think that is something that, you can visit Cisa's website and see a lot that we're doing across the 5G spectrum, particularly with the National Risk Management Center and a few other groups here. I think, my internal priority is also addressing some of the things that Chris, Pat, and Kurt mentioned too. 4G is not going away. It's going to have large applications for usage. And we need to keep that in mind, because often you can step inside a building and lose that great 5G coverage you just had outside. So we have to address that and make sure that technologies we deploy work on both networks, probably for the foreseeable future. The one other thing we want to mention is we want everyone to be thinking about the shutdown of 3G. A lot of people do not realize that there are a lot of technologies still relying on 3G, alarm systems, 911 devices that people can push in the event of emergency. So we really want people thinking about their families and knowing that they need to refresh those devices, before the carriers shut them down. And that's all part of, some of the messaging that we want to push from Cisa, that, cellular is an evolution. There'll be a 6G at some point, and it'll just kind of continue on. We've been talking about 5G for a while. It is not the panacea that's going to solve all problems. And as spectrum migrates, we'll even open up some more spectrum in the 4G areas that will expand capabilities there as well.
Interesting. Kurt, let's talk about any type of lessons learned as you're rolling out a new technology, and perhaps any barriers. Any sense of that as we look at unlocking 5G and enabling it, and enabling all of these IoT devices in these various environments, particularly ports and in between ports, et cetera?
I think the biggest lesson learned, and I heard the chief talk about it earlier, right before this panel discussion, is getting out and engaging with the front line to ensure what we're building and delivering is done not for them, but with them, right? Because that enables us to, provide the best capabilities and services from the viewpoint of the agent, officer, analyst, specialist, or anyone out there. So I think the number one thing is engaging and being, working with your end user side by side. That's critical.
Sure. And it did not go unnoticed. I actually wrote it down, is to get out there on the front line and ask those operators, right? Something that I know,
Yep.
Chris, Robert, you've done a lot of. Chris, let me throw it over to you. You've rolled out a lot of technology. What might the barriers be when you're rolling this capability out, beyond sort of the obvious, or any lessons learned that you want to bring up here?
That's a great question. The biggest barrier for us will be the coverage, and the next one will be the priority and preemption services that we get from it. Those will be probably the two biggest barriers to make sure that our operations stay viable along the way. I think those are big ones for us. Other than that, I think, once it becomes more ubiquitous, again, I think the sky's the limit at that point. I think there's a lot of opportunity. As Kurt said, I think there's a lot of opportunities for CBP in particular to take advantage based on our mission set and using that. But until, as Bob said, this gets installed, it gets installed securely, and it's where we need it to be operational. Those are going to be our biggest challenges going forward. As Pat said, there's going to be a little bit higher investment probably from the telecom carriers because they need more infrastructure. So those are some challenges and hurdles that I think, need to be overcome before there's wide adoption of this technology.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll see how the telecom vendors and carriers proceed and whether or not they actually deliver where we need it to be functional.
Sort of capture that promise, no doubt about it. Pat, how about from your perspective? No doubt that you've rolled out a lot of technology there. Any lessons learned? Any barriers that you foresee as they roll out this 5G capability nationwide?
I guess I'll give two. One is sort of well understood, but whenever we as a society roll out something new, we get super excited about it, think it's going to do everything. It's going to make French fries, it's going to cure cancer. And then we figure out it's merely good. I think to some extent we're in the hype curve of 5G. So I do think there's going to be a kind of social recognition. Hey, it works great for these, and maybe it doesn't actually make French fries. That's pretty much old hat. If you've rolled out technology, you expect that. I think the unexpected one with 5G is I think it's the first technology revolution I've seen in my lifetime with what I classify as pretty serious national security implications. So if you look at the way we've traditionally rolled out technology, security and providence were sort of secondary to social convenience. Was it easy to use? Was it fun? Did it do? Was it easy? I think with 5G, we as a society, it's not just government, like industry's thinking the same thing, private people are thinking the same thing. Hey, we got to be a little careful with this. Bad people could do bad things with this technology, or ultimately prevent us doing the right things with it. So I do think that's going to be different for us as a culture to roll out.
Yeah, that's a very good point you're making. And I know that, Bob, you had brought some of this up as well, even all the way into the supply chain. Give us some sense as to what the barriers might be, what the lessons learned might be as we're rolling out this capability.
Well, I think Pat brings up a lot of really good points, and I think it's occurring in some other industries as well. 5G is probably the one that will affect the largest population the most, but there are wide and there should be a lot of concerns around the industrial base. Industrial sabotage is real. Warfare is moving to the cyber realm. Denial of information is going to probably win some of the next battles that we go into. Our population, we have to be able to defend ourselves, and we also have to keep in mind that a lot of these technologies are rolling out that if they are compromised from the start, it is very difficult to evict those actors. So if you install a technology that's compromised, it's going to be very difficult to evict someone from it, if at all. So if you're deploying, say, 5G valves, that are monitorable in a water treatment plant, well, if that gets hacked, we have a really big problem. And if we go to an event with a nation state adversary and they affect our water supply, these are the things that we're starting to think about and that we need to be very, very conscious about. And I think that 5G is kind of at the forefront on that. I think you're seeing other areas too. Semiconductors have been in the news a lot because there is a shortage, and we don't have the capacity here in the United States to manufacture enough of our own semiconductors. We can do a certain portion of it, but not in totality. So I think that we need to start thinking about that, and then start thinking as well as we start, educating the next group of people that comes behind us, even starting in grade school. We got to start really pushing that STEM stuff and getting people excited about entering the technology field and looking at different entries into what cyber security means, because it is much broader than when all of us started out and we were securing network, Windows networks and stuff like that. It's much more than that now, and the effects are much more wide ranging, and that's why I think the security concerns around 5G are there. There are a lot of concerns too, in our overseas environments. If you could install a 5G network from company A and it costs 50% less than from company B, a lot of countries will have to go with company A, even if they know that there are fundamental concerns with that technology. And I think that's something that everyone should be greatly concerned with.
Very good point, and very important point. We're getting ready to wrap up here. We have a couple more minutes. Kurt, let me start with you. What does the future look like when we have 5G completely rolled out?
So I think it's easier and faster access to mission data with any device from any location. I think with that, it's a more enriched user experience, both for, I'm speaking on the side of both for CBP's frontline, for those that are the operators, but also a more enriched experience also for the travelers that are coming in and out of the country. And I think really what it comes down to, it's better outcomes. It will enable CBP to facilitate trade and travel, right, while protecting our borders and keeping everyone safe inside. That's like two sides of the same coin. It's a tricky thing to balance, but CBP has been doing it for a long time, and I just think things like 5G are just going to make it easier, faster, better, and have better experiences both for operators and for those that CBP encounters.
Pat, what's it look like from your perspective?
I think in the short to medium term, I think you're going to see fairly ubiquitous 5G. And I guess Chris called them the NFL cities. So that'll be useful for things like, Port of Long Beach. You're going to have good access there, right? Great cameras, great datacom. There'll be a lot of solutions we can do in the 2 to 3 year time horizon that we couldn't do 3 years ago. That's where I think you'll first see the real benefit. I think it'll take longer to get the infrastructure out to the rural parts of the country. So if you're looking to secure like some obscure corner of the Canadian border, I don't think 5G is going to be a useful tool in that toolbox in the call it 3 year time horizon. 5 to 8, probably, but I think you're going to see a phased rollout across the country, and solutions that are focused on those big city problems, I think will roll out first, because that'd be where the network will be first.
Chris, 3 years from now, what can we expect at CBP as far as enabling 5G capabilities, and what does that mean operationally?
So in 3 to 5 years, I do see us adopting, again, where the coverage is there. As Pat said, in those NFL cities, I think there's a lot of advantages we'll take early on, particularly on our backups. I do see us kind of moving to that on our disaster recovery operations and things of that nature. So there's some quick wins that we could probably take away from 5G once it becomes available to us. Longer term, I guess that still remains to be seen. I know Pat said maybe 5 to 8 that the coverage will be there. I'm not so certain, because we've been fighting that battle on the 4G side of it for such a long time, and with the additional infrastructure. So again, I think we're still going to be in the hand-to-hand combat when it comes down to, some of those rural areas and how we can improve. As Kurt said, we can never have too much bandwidth. I think we all know that, right? Even at our homes, sometimes we probably like, hey, I need to bump up from my 10 meg to my 100 meg or something bandwidth. So you can never have too much bandwidth, particularly as we're trying to get more and more into more data intensive environments. The other thing that kind of will concern me, though, is, we just saw the AWS, right? Nobody is immune to failure and to problems. I think 5G, again, is not going to be the panacea. It's still going to come, like Pat said, it's got some hype now, but at some point we will come down to reality on what it can and cannot provide. And we'll just have to adapt and adjust to that as it happens.
It won't cook your fries, but it will enable a lot of capability. Bob, last word from you.
Wow, last word. I would just say, I think we're all excited about this. I'm thrilled to be here and maybe in a capacity to still help CBP. I would definitely say that everyone, should read up on some of the security concerns and just see how we can all kind of help each other address these issues. It's not for the telecoms alone to solve, and it's something that we all need to be aware of as a country moving forward, especially as devices become more and more part of our daily lives. I think all of us now probably have, I live alone and there's about 20 devices connected to my home Wi-Fi. So I can only imagine what it's like with people with families. So we need to start thinking about that and start thinking about cybersecurity throughout our daily lives.